Hey, welcome back to Cody Builds. On today's episode, we're going to be focusing on cylinder heads, but let's get something out of the way right up front. A guy's been feeling not quite on top of the weather this week, so you're going to have to put up with my voice this week. A little nasally, a little raspy. Really just a cold, just slowing me down a little bit, but that's okay. We're not going to let it stop progress on our project, and I'm also not going to let it stop me from getting you guys some content this week. So, on this week's episode, like I said, we're focusing on cylinder heads. I've got 3 of them here. Let's dive into those. All right, so what I have here are 3 cylinder heads that are at various stages of the processes that I'm going through here. This one is as pulled, just with all of the components stripped off of it. This cylinder head in the center has gone through electrolysis to help remove rust. And this final cylinder head here is ready for reassembly. Now, some things you'll notice when you're talking about the differences between the as pulled and the one that's had the electrolysis done here. Notice all the carbon buildup on the inside of the combustion chambers here. And then when you look at this one here, it's just more raw steel. You will see some rust. You say, hey, I thought electrolysis was supposed to remove the rust. Well, this is just flash rust from where I pulled these out of the tank. If you take a look up top here, and I rub my finger over these rusty spots, what you'll see is we don't really remove the rust. It just kind of, it's there. It's still as part of the steel there. If I rub my finger up here, and where you see rust, it's more like it's sitting on top of the cylinder head. It's not actually chemically bound to the cylinder head anymore. So the electrolysis process is going to help you remove rust and get these things cleaned up. We'll go through that a little bit later. When we're talking about from this step to this step, what I've done here, I've lapped the valves, and you can see how shiny the ring is where all these valves seat in this head compared to this side, right? So you can see some shine in some of these, but for the most part, you see carbon buildup, you see corrosion. That's all gone in this cylinder head. Also, we've just gone through and really cleaned these things up. We've prepped the faces for gaskets. The last step for this guy is installation of all the components you see here, and we're going to go over that a little bit later in this video. So, first things first, we'll talk about disassembly. So the first thing that needed to happen was I needed to get rid of the broken exhaust manifold bolts. There were a number of them in each of the cylinder heads, and thankfully, actually, I kept my old set of cylinder heads from the original 360 that came out of this truck, because as I was going through my normal processes, the first thing I always try to do is heat the bolt up, the area around the bolt up, use penetrating oil, and try and turn that bolt out. I kept just snapping the studs off when I was doing that. I tried welding, that didn't work. Tried welding a nut onto the broken bolts, that didn't work. And then later I drilled, 3/4, even more than 3/4 of the bolt out and put an extractor in. The problem I had with that is those extractors are conical, and those bolts were in there. They were so stubborn, they did not want to come out. As that extractor was driving its way into the hole that I had drilled out, it ended up fracturing the exhaust flange. I didn't mess around too much. We could have tried to repair them, but I had two other cylinder heads that were available for replacement. So I just went with one of those. I cleaned it up, took it apart, and that's why you see 3 cylinder heads on the table here. So let's spin the first one around. I'll show you. This is the damage from where that manifold bolt cracked. I've had good luck with extractors in the past. I've really enjoyed working on these Ford FE engines, but I have to say, one of the things I'm really not fond of at all is this open exhaust flange bolt on the cylinder heads. I have 4 cylinder heads here that were removed from 2 different 360s. Well, 390 we're working on and the other 360. So that's 16 exhaust flange bolts. So there were 4 broken here. There were 1 here, that's 5. There were 3 on this one. So that's 8. And then the other cylinder head, I think there's 2 in that one. So 10 of the 16 exhaust flange bolts on the top side broke. The bottom side, all of them came out, no issues whatsoever. So it really is just this open hole, this open exhaust bolt hole that collects rust and seizes these bolts in here. And they were stuck something fierce, guys. So I tried my normal procedures of hitting them with heat and oil. That didn't work. I tried the extractor, as I said, and this snapped off. And this, from what I understand, is a fairly common problem. Again, these are just crappy original heads, so I'm not too concerned. And we had a backup, which is what we ended up going with here. So after that, what I decided on was just drilling out the bolts. And that actually worked fairly well. The one thing you want to be careful of there is when you're drilling, I put these actually in my drill press. And I made sure that the cylinder head was on the stand, level in both directions, so that I drilled straight down through the bore of that exhaust flange. Now, using the drill press, I was able to drill out the bolts, and I was able to, on some of them, I was able to remove the original threads and just re-tap those bolt holes. On some other ones, even the threads were so stubborn I couldn't get them all the way out, so we had to over drill those holes. I ended up then tapping those for a helicoil, putting a helicoil in, and fixing the bolt flanges that way. So the other thing I did is I went through both of these cylinder heads, and I went through every bolt hole in these two heads, and I used a thread chaser and a tap to clear out all of the bolt holes in both of these cylinder heads. This is all the original hardware that came off of this engine, and I've already gone through and cleaned all this hardware up, and I've run all of these bolts through a thread chaser or through a die in some cases if the threads are particularly marred up. I inspected all the hardware here, and because I had already taken apart another engine block that we're not using any of that hardware for, I actually did end up replacing some bolts from this engine with some from the other, because there were just flat out wrong bolts used, and that led to things like this bolt hole here in this cylinder head being completely stripped out. The threads are completely gone. There was a metric bolt jammed in there of all things. So I drilled this out, I put a helicoil in it, and it's ready to go now. Once I had the exhaust manifold bolts taken care of, the next step was to remove all of the valves and the valve springs and the valve retainers. Now, this is a fairly straightforward job if you have the proper tool. There are all different kinds of valve spring presses out there. This happens to be the one that I use. It took me about 20 minutes to disassemble all the valves in one cylinder head. And I did organize all the hardware here, so I know what cylinder head these came out of, and I also know what cylinder each set of these valves came out of. So they're all gonna go right back where they came from, unless we see something we don't like, and then we're gonna replace them with. We've got a second set of hardware over here. We'll inspect all the hardware, and if we don't like something, we'll go ahead and replace it. Once all of the valve assemblies were removed, the next step was to run both these cylinder heads through an electrolysis tank. And quite simply, what our electrolysis tank is gonna do is it is going to reduce any of the oxidation that's on your iron heads. So rust is oxidation, and typically in a electrolysis tank, you have two processes happening. You have reduction, you have an oxidation. You want to be reducing the iron part that you want to keep, and you want to oxidize a sacrificial piece of steel. This is the sacrificial piece of steel for my electrolysis tank. So you can see I've just got some iron pipe here that I welded some 16 gauge steel on, and you can just see just how much rust this thing accumulates in the electrolysis tank. Electrolysis is a fairly straightforward process. We take something like this tote here, we fill it with water. Once it's full of water, I use this washing soda here. Really simple stuff. I don't really measure out any quantities. I just put a good healthy amount in there, stir it up, and that's going to be our electrolyte that's going to help facilitate the reaction that's occurring in the electrolysis tank. Once I've got that electrolyte mixed up, I'm putting my sacrificial steel, which needs to be clean. So just for the record, that what I just showed you is completely rusted up. You need fresh, clean steel in there. If you were to put that back in, you're not going to have much luck facilitating that reaction. So you always want to start with clean steel. You can actually take your sacrificial piece, hit it with the grinder and brush wheel if you want, and reuse it. Now, over time, it will eventually break down because you're oxidizing that piece of steel, and we all know when things rust and get oxidized like that, it breaks down the iron, and eventually you'll be left with nothing. So you just make sure that you've got the clean steel going in there for your sacrificial piece, and then you need to put in whatever part you're trying to clean up. Important thing here, your sacrificial steel and the part you're trying to clean up cannot touch in the tank. They need to be separated completely. You don't want them making contact in any way, shape, or form. Additionally, when you're talking about a standard like galvanic battery situation, the cathode is positive and the anode is negative. In this case, in an electrolytic cell, the cathode is actually negative and the anode is positive. Why is that important? If you strictly look up how to hook up an electrolysis tank, and it tells you, that your part is going to be the cathode and your sacrificial steel is going to be the anode. What you do not want to have happen is you do not want to put the battery leads, the positive battery leads, onto your part and the negative battery leads onto your sacrificial piece of steel. You do that, this is going to come out looking like your sacrificial steel that I just showed you. So always, always, always in an electrolysis tank, the part you're trying to clean gets the negative lead from your battery charger. So once your part is in the tank and once your sacrificial steel is in the tank, you've got your electrolyte mixed up, you're going to hook a negative lead from a battery charger onto your part. You're going to hook a negative lead from your battery charger onto your part. You're going to hook the positive lead onto your sacrificial steel piece, and then you're going to set your battery charger. Now, this is where it gets a little bit difficult because modern battery chargers are ultra safe, right? They've got safeties built into them where essentially, as you're putting amperage to the battery, if the voltage on that battery isn't changing, it's going to stop the charging process because we're putting amps into the battery in an effort to try and raise the voltage on the battery. If that's not happening, you can cook the battery, cook the electrolyte inside the battery or whatever is in your battery, if it's a lead acid battery, and boil the battery and blow the thing up, right? So there are safeties in place for that. If you have a modern battery charger and you're trying to use it on an electrolysis tank, odds are it's not going to work. It's not going to see a voltage increase in that system, right? We're just trying to put continual amperage to these parts. And so what it's going to do is it's going to go into safety mode. It's going to stop putting electricity into your sacrificial piece of steel, and then nothing's going to happen. So what you need to find is an old school manual battery charger that has no digital controls in it, or I'll show you the cheap one I picked off of Amazon. I picked up this cheap one where it's got two options. It's got a manual setting, you can see there, and then an automatic setting, just a toggle switch. And if this is in manual mode, it will supply voltage to that system no matter what. So just make sure that whatever battery charger you're using needs to be a manual charger. I highly recommend you do this outside of your garage. One of the byproducts of this process is hydrogen gas. Hydrogen gas is highly flammable and highly explosive. You really don't want this in a confined area. So at a minimum, you want it in a well-ventilated area. Outside of your garage is the best option. I let these go for 48 hours. In other instances where I've had really rusty parts that I've done, every 2 days I've checked on these parts. I've pulled my sacrificial steel out, cleaned it up, started with fresh again, and then put it back in. And we just let that go until you start seeing all of this rust broken up, and it's going to be fairly obvious after about 24 hours. You're going to see a bunch of crud and stuff floating in the top of that tank, and it's going to be really exciting. Don't pull it after 24 hours. Let it sit. I personally let this stuff sit for about 48 hours. If it's really, really rusty, I've gone as much as like a week because the process is going to be more line of sight at first. Clear off all the rust and things, line of sight, and then it's going to start working its way down into all the chambers of the valve, of the head, and all that stuff. So just keep that in mind. It could take something intricate like a cylinder head is going to take a couple days. Now something not like, say you just want to clean up a set of rods or something, you throw a set of iron rods in there, those might only take you 24 hours because they really shouldn't be that rusty to begin with, and they're a fairly flat surface, so they're not too intricate. It's not going to take a bunch of time for that reaction to occur. So that pretty much brings you up to speed with where we're at now. So the next step I have here, I need to lap the valves inside of this cylinder head. You can see here, like I showed before, you can see how clean the valve seating surfaces are here compared to here. And part of that is because I haven't cleaned this up, but the other part of that is there is a bunch of carbon and stuff jammed in these valve seats. We're going to clean all that up so we get a nice seating surface between the valve and the valve seat to keep from any major leaks or anything like that happening in the valves. All right, the first thing I want to do before we actually start lapping the valves, I want to clean these valves up. And you'll see some residual rust on these valves. You'll see some wear marks in here from the guides. So the first thing I'm going to do, I just have a drill, and I have a little like 3/8 socket adapter in my drill that I pushed a piece of rubber hose over. And then I stick the valve stem down into the hose, and now I can actually rotate the valve. So I use this for both lapping and cleaning the valves. I'm just going to grab some Scotch-Brite to start, and if you use just Scotch-Brite on the stems, you're going to scratch the stems up pretty good. So we'll use that to knock off the crusty stuff initially, and we're going to come back with, I believe this is a 2000 grit sandpaper and some WD-40, and just polish the stems up and clean the valve heads up as well. So there you go. You can see first pass, we're going to do this again, but you can see how much carbon we've taken off of that. You can see there's still a little bit of carbon buildup on the bottom side of the valve. Let's look at this one here for comparison. See the difference there. So we're just going to keep doing this. We're going to clean these all the way up, get all this carbon and grit off of this thing, and then we'll polish the valve stems and we'll move on to the next one. You can see that cleaned up pretty well. Pretty happy with that. So on to the next exhaust valve here. All right, so I've got all my valves cleaned up. I've got all the carbon and buildup knocked off of those. Now it's time to clean up the valve seats and the valve faces and match them. We're gonna do that by lapping these valves with valve grinding compound. Now this is Permatex product. There are 4 different grits in this compound. There's a 120, 150, 180, and 220 grit built into this compound. So you don't have to use multiple grits of compound to get the results you want. As you work through grinding on these seat faces, it starts to break down the lower level grits until you work your way up until a smooth finish with the 220 grit. So it's kind of a nice little compound. I've used that before, but let's get into it. I'll show you guys how we're going to go about this. All right, first things first, I'm going to put just a little bit of assembly lube on the shaft of this valve because we are going to be spinning it in the valve seat, and we want that lubricated. We don't want it dry. Otherwise, they'll end up scratching the valve stem up after we just polished those stems. So, and then I'm going to take this valve grinding compound, and I'm just going to put a little bit on the face of the valve here. So I'm just going to work that around on the face of the valve here. It doesn't take a ton of compound. You don't want to go nuts with this. And we're just going to coat the entire face of this valve. Okay, once we've got the valve seat covered, just like that, we're going to slide it into the valve guide, slide it all the way in, and I'm actually doing this in the order that these valves go. So I'm using the valve that will go into this valve guide to do this process. So I'm only going to use each valve once in the corresponding valve guide to ensure that the valve seats match. Now again, using my drill and the rubber hose, I'm going to attach this onto the end of the valve stem. And we don't want this on the high setting. We're going to set it on the low setting here. We're going to spin the valve. You can see the valve spinning there. We don't need a ton of RPM here, but we're going to put a little pressure with our finger on the valve as we spin, and you're going to feel that grinding compound doing its work. You're going to continue to do this until it starts to get smooth, and then we're going to stop, clean everything up, and see what the results look like. And I like to open and close the valve a little bit just to really seat that compound down in there. I'm going to slide this back out. Now the valve out, I'm just going to wipe off the face of this valve real quick. And what you'll see is the wear pattern from where that grit was grinding on the valve face. So you can kind of see that wear band. And then we're going to clean this up as well. And what we're looking for is a clean, uniform wear band. We don't want to see any spots. Any spots that you see are going to be pitting in the valve or in the valve seat surface. I'm going to clean this up real quick with some brake cleaner there just to make sure I get all the grit off. We can see what it looks like here. Okay, let me show you guys this here. You can kind of see that dull band there. That's from our valve grinding compound. And I've got a nice pattern there on the valve. I've got the same thing up here in the cylinder head. I am just going to give it a quick spray just to make sure I'm not missing anything. And yeah, that looks really, really good actually. So you can see how clean this is now compared to, say, the one right directly below it. We're really just getting rid of any of the imperfections, mating this valve surface to the valve seat. and grinding any imperfections out of it with that compound. And so let me show you, this is a valve I took off of the other cylinder head that I actually replaced, because I'm going to spray this down real quick. So I was grinding this in the valve seat, and what I noticed were all these dark spots on the face of the valve. I don't know if you'll be able to see those or not, but you can see all these dark spots in the valve. That's actually pitting on the valve face. So rather than try and grind all the way down, we just went ahead and replaced this valve, because I have a whole set of valves from 2 other heads. So we found an appropriate valve, one that was in better condition. We went ahead and replaced it. But that's the type of stuff you're looking for. You don't want to see a bunch of spots like that either in the valve or in the valve seat. Another thing I'm going to touch on real quick. A lot of guys aren't going to like the way that I'm lapping these valves. There is a hand tool that you can use for this. Some people are going to say I'm turning way too many RPMs on those valve stems, and they are probably absolutely right. But here's the deal, guys. If I'm being 100% honest, the valve guides in these are worn out anyways. They are probably out of tolerance, but this is a budget build, and literally in this build, if it's not broke, we're not replacing it. This is going to be a temporary engine for the truck, like I've said many times. So these cylinder heads are kind of on the rough side as far as the valve stems go. A couple other things that I found in them. I can tell in the original heads that I pulled off the 390 that they had been reworked, because someone had put new valve guides in them, and they're in much better shape than this other set of heads. These guys are pretty worn out. If I was going for any type of longevity out of this engine, I would have those valve guides replaced, and I'd have just the valve job done at the shop instead of doing this lapping. So in my eyes, doing this type of lapping thing, what we're going for here is a quick repair and something that's going to last maybe a couple thousand miles, 5,000, maybe 10,000 miles. We're not going for that 150,000 mile type of repair here. So keep that in mind. All the stuff we're doing on this engine is on the budget side of things. There is a budget here. Making major repairs on these cylinder heads are not in the budget. It's not something I want to spend money on right now. And on top of that, I just don't see the value in it for these heads. If I was going to spend any money on these heads, let's say I'm going to have new valve guides put in, the valve seats redone, have the head shot peen, have everything gone through, right? Then I'm probably going to put new valves in it. I'm going to put new valve springs, go through all that, okay? What is that going to cost me at the machine shop? So in parts, in valves, springs, guides, we're going to be at least $200-300 into that. The machining work's going to be another $200-300. You're talking probably $600-800 to rework a stock set of heads. Now the Edelbrock replacement cylinder heads for this are about $900. And from my understanding, you're going to get about the same performance out of those Edelbrock heads as you are out of the stock heads. There's not like some huge performance gain to be had. It's just that you're going back with aluminum heads. You're going back with all new parts, right? So you're going to get more of that reliability possibly out of those Edelbrock heads. Now the other thing that I've kind of seen about those Edelbrock heads, they're supposed to be bolt on the stock rocker arms and all that stuff. But from what I gather, you can't get proper geometry out of the stock rocker arm assemblies and those Edelbrock heads. So someone can tell me wrong on that. That's just what I've been reading online. So to tie that all back, this is a budget build. Like I said, if it ain't broke, we aren't fixing it. We're just trying to clean things up and give ourselves the best possible outcome we can out of these kind of worn parts that we already have, right? We would have replaced the rocker arm shaft. That had wear in it. We'd replace the valve guides. We would have replaced the valves. We would have done all this stuff if we were going full bore on this engine, but we're not doing that. We're just going for a stock rebuild. So I've had good luck doing this on small block Chevy heads before. I've never done it on a Ford FE, so we'll see. But I'm gonna go ahead and continue to lap all these valves, and then the next step, we're gonna need to fully wash and clean the cylinder head, get all the grinding compound out of it, get all the debris out of it. We're gonna run brushes through it, fully clean it, then clean all the valves up to make sure there's no grinding compound on those, and lastly, assemble the cylinder heads. So I'm gonna get to work now because that's gonna take me a few hours. All right, we've got the cylinder head clean, we've got the valves clean, we got the springs, retainers, keepers, all that stuff clean, 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 ready to go. Look how much better our combustion chambers look here, how clean all these valve seats are. Like, everything looks really, really good. I'm really happy with this. You know, these heads are, like I said before, aren't in fantastic shape when you're talking about when you're talking about valve guides and things like that, but these turned out pretty good. They cleaned up really nicely. We got most of the rust off of them. The only thing I'm not super thrilled about are the exhaust flanges. They're pretty pitted up, pretty beat up. I'm probably gonna have to silicone around the exhaust gaskets when I put these in, because I'm not super confident we're gonna be able to actually get those to seal up. But that's a problem for another day. We're gonna finish up the installation of the valves, the springs, retainers. So we're gonna start at the top, work our way down, and I'll show you guys a couple small tricks that I use when I'm doing this process. All right, so I'm gonna kind of give you a first person view here. We're gonna get the first valve installed. So look how nicely these turned out. Look how clean this is. Got a little dirt on there. But I went ahead, cleaned my fingers up too, so I don't have a bunch of dirt and debris on them, because I'm out of gloves at the garage here. I ran out earlier today. But we're gonna put a little assembly lube on the valve stem. We're gonna rub that into the stem, just give it a nice liberal coating. We're gonna slide our valve into the guide, slide that on. And then the next thing we're gonna do, we're gonna take our valve stem seal, and I've just got these cheap rubber style ones, and we're gonna slide this over the valve stem there, and just push that all the way down to the cylinder head and seat that. Next up comes the spring. Spring goes on, and then the spring retainer. With the spring and the spring retainer on, we grab our valve spring compressor and get that lined up where it needs to be. And I'm gonna compress that valve spring down. We're gonna take our lock collar, slide that on. And then, show you here, I'll grab one of our keepers here, and I put a little dot of assembly lube inside our retainer. And the reason I do that is because when I put this on the valve stem, I roll this around to the bottom side, and that little bit of assembly lube is going to hold that on the valve stem upside down without me having to try and hold it with multiple hands here. So it kind of holds that in place, and then since I set it on the top and roll it around, there's a little bit of assembly lube in the stem there as well. And that's just gonna keep those retainers on the valve stem while we then slowly back the collar out onto the keepers, the lock collar. And that's it. It's that simple. The last thing I like to do is just take a rubber mallet, smack the valve a couple of times to make sure the keepers stay in place. All right, here you go, guys. Check it out. Final product. Look how good this turned out. Nice and clean, everything. Fresh start. Kinda. All right, so that's it, guys. We've got these cylinder heads assembled and they are ready to go back on the truck. Now, as one last little closing here, I do have one cylinder head left that I have not touched since it got pulled off the engine. So this is going to give you a great before, how they looked before we even started this process, and then how it looks now. So let's get in here and take a look real quick. Sometimes it's good to keep a perspective of where we started from, where we came from, and where we are going. You can see all the carbon buildup, and then just how good all of this looks. You can see all the burnt oil on the valve springs here, how dirty everything is. And then this is what's going back in. Nice, clean. Gonna have no debris getting into the engine if we can help it. Well, it's always good to keep perspective, guys, and I'm not losing mine at this moment. I am so over cleaning parts, engine parts specifically. When we're doing these type of budget things, man, really what you give up in a budget, what you give up in not having to spend money, you really pay double for in time. There's so much time just in cleaning bolts and cleaning out passages and cleaning parts, getting everything clean and ready to go back together. But here's the thing. Now we know all these parts we put back in are spotless. We don't have carbon or built up oil or any of that stuff that's going to be pumping through this engine, all these new bearings once we get everything back together. So I'm really excited about that. I'm excited to get this thing dialed in, get it running, get it in the truck. So on the next episode, we're going to start the assembly process. We have a few small things that need to be done first. I'm going to show you guys how to check ring gap and how to check bearing clearances. And then we're going to start the process by installing the cam bearings, installing the cam, getting the crankshaft in, then the rods and pistons. So that's going to be coming up on next week. Thank you guys all so much for your support. I really do appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time to make comments. Thanks for taking the time to watch the videos. I hope you guys find them entertaining. I hope you pick up a few tips here or there. And I hope, ultimately, you don't take anything you see here too terribly serious. I'm just out here having fun. I'm trying to learn some new stuff, learn some new processes, refine on my skills. And, ultimately, by the time this truck's said and done, I'll have touched every single part and component of this truck, literally every nut and bolt, down to every nut and bolt in the engine. And as I make these videos, I hope they can be a resource for you guys to watch and learn something, even just to see how something comes apart and goes back together. Sometimes that's all you need. Thanks again. Thank you. Like I said, thank you for your support. Thank you for watching, subscribing. If you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing. I would really, really appreciate it. If you enjoy watching the videos, please click subscribe. Subscription has a negative connotation with it, that it costs money or something. It does not. Click that subscribe button. I'll show up in your feed. You can watch my videos week to week. We post every week at 4. All that said, guys, you know the deal. If you don't work on your projects, even when you're under the weather, they will not work on themselves. Get out in the garage, get building, and I'll see you on the next episode of Cody Builds.